Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Now, we will be exploring the different approaches of teaching literature. I am Vanessa Fabi Umbahen, and these are my fellow reporters. We have Miss Emily Pendez, followed by Zara Denise Gascon, and the last is Miss Leanne Poncardes. Before we begin the discussion about the different approaches of teaching literature, let's know first, what is literature? According to Lombardi, it is derived from the Latin word literature, meaning writing formed with letters. Literature most commonly refers to the works of creative imagination. So, what are these? We have poetry, drama, fiction, nonfiction, and in some instances, journalism and songs. Therefore, literature is the term used to describe written and sometimes spoken materials. What is then an approach? According to Anthony, an approach is a set of assumptions dealing with the nature of language, learning, and also teaching. While for Brown, an approach is the theoretically well informed positions and beliefs about the nature of language, the nature of language learning, and the applicability of both to pedagogical settings. Now, when we say approach, it is the framework or the operations, sequence of operations to be used when we are teaching. And based on the definitions mentioned, it is clear that an approach will influence our teaching strategies. There are many approaches that can be employed to teach literature, and we will discuss each one of them. So, here are the approaches. First, we have the language based approach, followed by paraphrastic or periphrastic approach, information based approach, personal response, moral philosophical approach, stylistic approach, literature as content, and literature for personal enrichment. Let's have the language based approach. So, this approach is closely related to the language model, which was discussed by the previous group, and it's also where literary texts are seen as means to helping students improve language proficiency. So, take note, the key word for this is language proficiency. This is done by providing them exposure to the target language and connecting them to specific vocabulary and other aspects of the language. This approach uses stories, poems, and plays to help students get better at the language they are learning. Say, for example, you are reading a Harry Potter book, but not just for the magic and adventure, but also to explore and understand every spell, or what we call the words, and understand the magical structure, or what we call the grammar, that makes the story so captivating. And when the students read literature, they're not just following a story, they're also seeing the language in action. They notice new words, how sentences are built, and how characters expresses different emotions. So that's what language-based approach is. Furthermore, language-based approach helps students pay attention to the way language is used when studying literature. It is also student centered and activity based. That's according to Dillon and Mogan. Now, the primary aim of this approach is quite simply to use literary texts as a resource for stimulating language activities. The method used in this approach is learning by doing, since students are not just memorizing words and rules, but they're also using the language, discussing it with their classmates, and they can even write short stories or poems, which makes learning relevant and fun. Moving on to the next approach, which is the paraphrastic approach. The next approach deals with the surface meaning of the text. That's according to Wang and MB. This means that when the students read something, they first understand it at its most basic level, what the words on the text say directly, before they dive into deeper meaning or themes. Rosley, on the other hand, asserts that it allows teachers to use simpler words and sentence structures compared to the more complicated ones in the text. Now, let's have an example for this. Let's say that the line in the text says, the protagonist contemplated his existence within the vast cosmos. Now, upon hearing that one, it's very hard to understand it, right? So, as a teacher, you can simplify it. Instead of saying that, you can say, the main character thought about his life and the big universe. So, it's more understandable. In paraphrastic approach, teachers use simpler words or versions of the stories, and sometimes they even translate it to the student's first language and then explain them with easier words and sentences. Again, paraphrastic approach is mainly paraphrasing and rewarding the text to simpler language. It is also teacher centered. It's because in this approach, the teacher is the one who breaks down the text, chooses what's important, and presents it in a way that it's easier for students to understand. Congratulations! We are now done with the first two approaches of teaching literature. We will now move on to the third and fourth approaches, which will be discussed by our next reporter, Emily T. Pendez.
Hello, everyone. So, this is Emily Pendez, and I am going to continue the discussion of Miss Vanessa earlier. So, this time, let us have the information based approach and the personal response approach. So, first, let us have the information based approach. So, this approach is an approach that demands a large input from the teacher. In other words, this is a teacher centered approach. So, this approach gives knowledge and information to students, and it describes the study of literature as aesthetically patterned artifact endowed with a knowledge potentials philosophy, culture, morality, and humanities. So, in this approach, students are given knowledge and information through an information-based approach. So, as what I have mentioned earlier, this is a teacher-centered approach, and it necessitates a great deal of teachers' participation in providing pupils with a variety of literary text contents. And in this approach, it gives students literature's knowledge as a source of information, and it comprises reading from critic or notes, as well as explanations and lectures offered by the teacher in preparation for the tests. So, some examples of information based approach in teaching literature, it includes using of multimedia resources or virtual libraries, online databases, and literary analysis tools to enhance students' understanding and engagement with the texts. Moreover, it incorporates research based assignments. Discussions and projects can help students deepen their knowledge and critical thinking skills in literature. Next, here we have the personal response approach. So, in this approach, it associated with personal growth model proposed by Carter and Long during 1991, as it aims is to elicit personal response and foster students' personal development. So, in the personal response approach, the learners respond to what appear to be the author's intention and the meanings presumed to be rooted firmly in the text. So, in this approach, the learner thus plays a secondary or dependent role to the text in the response process, since the emphasis is on decoding what the author or what the text says. So, example for this one are examples of personal response approach in teaching literature that includes encouraging students to express their thoughts, to express their feelings and opinions about the text they have read through journal entries, or reflective essays, group discussions, and creative projects. So, this approach focuses on fostering students' personal connections and interpretations of the literature. It allows for a more individualized and a reflective learning experience. That's for the personal response approach.
Hi everyone! In continuation of the approaches of teaching literature, I am Zaira Denise Cascon, and I will discuss the other two approaches, which are the moral philosophical approach and stylistic approach. First, let's discuss what is the moral philosophical approach. Moral philosophical approach focuses on using literature to explore ethical and philosophical themes. Students delve into the values, beliefs, and motivations of characters, analyzing the consequences of their choices. Discussions explore timeless questions about right and wrong, good and evil, justice, and the human condition. As teachers, it's important for us to guide our students in exploring the ethical and philosophical themes present in literature. Instead of simply analyzing plot events, we want to encourage students to delve into the deeper questions about morality, injustice, and human nature. The benefits of moral philosophical approach are develops critical thinking and ethical reasoning skills, encourages empathy and understanding of diverse perspectives, connects literature to real world issues and personal values, guided towards self realization and self understanding. This approach also fosters a deeper connection between literature and real world issues, promoting meaningful reflection and discussion among students. So now let's move on to the activities that we can incorporate into our teaching to facilitate the moral philosophical approach. We can have a class discussion on moral dilemmas faced by characters, comparing and contrasting moral values across different cultures and historical periods, debating the motivations and actions of characters, and analyzing how literary elements like symbolism contribute to moral themes. These activities that I have presented encourage students to think critically and engage deeply with ethical themes. Now, let us move on to our next approach, which is the stylistic approach. It implies literary critics and linguistics analysis. Stylistics combines aspects of linguistics and literary criticism, but maintain its distinct focus on understanding language usage within text and developing interpretative procedures for readers. It is for students to appreciate and understand in a deeper manner of the literary text. It helps students to interpret the text meaningfully and develops language awareness and knowledge. It analyzes the language prior to the elements of literary text. So, as teachers, we want to help our students appreciate the craft of writing and understand how authors use language to convey meaning. Rather than focusing on plot, we aim to analyze the literary techniques employed by authors to create specific effects and evoke emotions. So, same as with the moral philosophical approach, stylistic approach also offers numerous benefits for our students. First, it enhances appreciation for the power of language. It develops close reading and analytical skills, improves students' writing skills by understanding how authors achieve certain effects. It plays a crucial role in teaching literature by developing readers' interpretative skills and awareness of aesthetic features in texts. It focuses on both grammatical rules, and social conventions in language usage. Let's be reminded that stylistics enhances the teaching and learning of English literature by sensitizing students to the richness and novelty of language. It helps educators effectively communicate literary strategies and encourages a deeper understanding of literary texts. By integrating linguistic insights, stylistics aids in literary analysis, providing strategies for understanding and interpreting literature effectively. So now let's explore some activities that we can incorporate into our teaching to facilitate the stylistic approach. First is to identify and analyze figures of speech like metaphors, similes, and personifications. Comparing and contrast the writing styles of different authors, discussing the impact of word choice and sentence structure on mood and tone, examining how literary devices like foreshadowing and symbolism contribute to the plot. These activities promote active engagement with language and encourage students to become more attentive readers. In conclusion, moral philosophical approach fosters critical thinking, empathy, and understanding of diverse perspectives. Students explore ethical and philosophical themes, connecting literature to real-world issues and personal views. The stylistic approach enhances appreciation for the craft of writing and improves writing skills. Analyzing literary techniques and linguistic devices deepens understanding of texts and encourages close reading. And I'd like to share some valuable references that you can explore further to enhance your understanding of the moral philosophical approach and the stylistic approach in literature teaching.
Hello everyone, I am Lian Puncardes and I am the last presenter of our group. I'm going to present the last two parts of the approaches of teaching literature and in continuation with the topics discussed by the Saxony reporters, I am going to discuss the literature as content and literature for personal development. So, to give you an idea on what these approaches is all about, I prepared the following sentences to summarize each approaches. For literature as content, it focuses on text rather than language. As in the title itself, in this approach, we are more concerned on areas such as the history and characteristics of literary movements, the social, political, and historical backgrounds to a text, and the literary genres and rhetorical devices. Moreover, in literature for personal enrichment, it aims to encourage students to discuss their feelings and experiences. At the same time of learning English, they become more active both intellectually and emotionally. So, this method is also an excellent stimulus for group work. So, in order to see the point of these approaches in detail, I am also going to discuss it in detail. So, we have here literature as content. In literature as content method, the primary focus is on the text itself regarding the content rather than the language. Thus, prior knowledge about the text, such as the literary movements they belong to, the biography of the writer, and political background, should be given to the students before they start examining the text. The dilemma arising here is that literature teachers might be more appropriate for this method to use with literature rather than a language teacher. Also, some critics argue that it is more appealing to students who have a special interest in literature. On the other hand, literature as content method would be beneficial in terms of increasing students' cognitive and intercultural skills by providing them with a variety of cultural sources if the teacher involves background information and arrange the in-class activities. The interconnection of language and literature is acknowledged and examined in the field of language education and many language methods. Going on to the methodological assumptions of literature as content, this is actually the most traditional approach and it is frequently used in tertiary education. Literature itself is the content of the course, which concentrates on areas such as the history and characteristics of literary movements, the social, political, and historical background to texts, literary genres, and rhetorical devices. Also, above these features, we discuss one of the possible negative aspects of this approach is if the literary text is difficult linguistically. Students may depend on the teacher's ready-made interpretation if that happens. Therefore, the background information to be supplied in this approach is very important. So the teacher should discuss the biographical information about the author, the historical mythological events or the characters, the philosophical, political, or religious ideas in the text, as well as the places, objects, or other texts referred to in the text to give students more background. In the selection and organization of materials of literature as context, teachers should choose the text according to students' linguistic levels, as linguistically difficult texts might be demotivating for students. Texts are selected for their importance as part of a literary canon or tradition. Now we're done with the first topic. Let's go on to the literature for personal enrichment. Actually, the main goal of the personal enrichment method is to encourage students to talk and discuss about their own feelings and experiences. Teachers might prepare a survey to examine the students' interests, or they might provide students with options with multiple texts to let them select the text to study. Group work or peer work might be applied in the classroom activities to be used with the personal enrichment method to increase students' motivation when they are not willing to share opinion. As as the personal involvement is tolerably demanded in this method, classroom activities should encourage interaction and discussion. The classroom activities should be centered on speaking and writing skills. Poems can be used to relate their themes and topics with students' own life and experiences, and rewriting and critical discussion sections will be suggestive to increase students' participation. In the methodological assumptions of literature for personal enrichment, literature is a useful tool for encouraging students to draw on their own personal experiences, feelings, and opinions. It helps students to become more actively involved both intellectually and emotionally in learning English and hence aids acquisitions excellent stimulus for group work. So to sum it up, it involves learner as a whole person, right? Also, above these features, we discuss one of the possible negative aspects of this approach while teaching English is that some texts may be so removed from the student's own experiences. In addition, some students may not find pleasure in discussing about their own feelings, emotions, or reactions. In the selection and organization of material, material is chosen on the basis of whether it is appropriate for students' interests and will stimulate a high level of personal involvement. Material is often organized thematically and may be placed alongside non-literary materials which deal with a similar theme. Um, in this part, teachers should consider the material selection procedure critically when applying this method, as it is more important to select texts which are in line with learners' age and interest. Thus, it is highly significant for a teacher to know his or her students first. And that's the end of my part for the group's presentation and the end of our report as a whole in the approaches of teaching literature. These are the references of the topics discussed, okay, presented here, and that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.